When you look at the state of the world right now, it feels a bit like the world is on fire.
Literally, yeah. Literally.
Do you think that that is actually the case? Or do you think that that is the narrative that's being pushed or exacerbated by media and the state of media right now?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think I'll answer it by looking at the lens of history. And I feel as though generationally, the easiest thing to do is to say that back in the day was better, you know, like music was better, life was better, culture was better. We have that generationally, you know. My mum, she always says the state of the world. I'm sure her mum did the same thing, right? And so I caveat it with that reality, which is maybe the grass is always greener when we look at history and nostalgia. And then I think the other layer to add, which I think is important to bear in mind, is just access to information is at an all-time high. And so we can engage with the shit going on in the world more frequently, more in depth than we ever have been able to. And so I think that those two things is probably what makes it feel like the world is more on fire than it was back in the day. But then I think the very important thing to do to answer the question is to look at how things affect individual life. And you know, when you do look at that and you do see ultimately what I think is very important, a loss of community across the world, that for me, I think will underpin any way you look at this question. I think communities are being lost. I think in this kind of like fight to make something of yourself and capitalism and working harder and working this and working that, I think people are starting to lose innately what makes humans human, which is togetherness and community. And I think like once you then overlay whether it's worse or not as bad, the negatives that's always going to happen in the world, it can start to seem like the world is completely on fire, because I think people have less of a positive spike less frequently.
Where did we go wrong? Like, if we're losing what it means to be human, and to be human means community and togetherness, when did that go away? Because we know it feels good, right? We know when we have it, it feels good. So why would we stop doing the thing that feels good? Human beings generally don't do that, right? So where did we go wrong? Hey everyone, I wanted to take one quick sec to talk about a new partner that I am so excited to announce I have on the show, an agency called Untapped. Untapped exists to put your brand in the world's pocket with beautifully crafted, high-impact mobile experiences. They've worked with brands like Barclays, EA Sports, American Express, and even the UK government. They're known for creating powerful apps with intuitive, seamless interactions that drive customer engagement and elevate brand recognition. But it isn't just tech development. Their expertise is bridging phenomenal quality technology with beautiful design to create the highest quality product possible that takes your users on a real journey with you. You may remember Will, the founder of Untapped, from episode 13 of the podcast. If you haven't heard that chat, I highly recommend it, because it shows you what kind of no-nonsense, sleeves-rolled-up kind of people he and the team he's built really are, and it reflects in the kind of work that they do. They want to make their clients' work recognized across their industries and drive real game-changing value, something I've personally experienced and appreciated working with them myself. For businesses who want to take this next step in their journey, Untapped can help with everything from tech creation to brand design to product marketing and so much more. All right, the links are down below. Check it out. And now back to the episode.
I think, two things can be true though, right? That it does feel good, but so does other things, right? So do other things.
That's a good point.
And so naturally, I think as well as humans are, as good as humans are at like knowing what feels good, they're also innately seeking evolution and seeking differences and seeking changes and not kind of sticking with what's in front of us. I think that the clamor to techify everything, I wouldn't say, I'm not one of these people who thinks that technological age has destructed humanity. I think you can find community in tech and there's so many use cases and examples of where that's happened. But I personally believe that over the years, structures exist in the world to ultimately make it easier to make money.
Okay. So it all comes back to money and the ability to make money.
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. That's my personal opinion.
Okay.
I'm not an
That's what we're here for.
anti-capitalist.
I just want to know why. Talk to you about why.
I think that's the root reason.
Okay.
Even when you think about stuff that is, broadly positive. So I'm a father, I've got a 1-year-old, and I was talking to my wife yesterday about this new initiative from the government, which is like free childcare. And childcare, especially in this country when you're almost like pushed to go back to work, is like the thing that is really important for people who don't necessarily have communities to support, right? And then you look at the scheme, and the scheme that they're going to roll out in September is 30 hours free childcare, which is incredible, right? But then you look underneath it and it's for working parents. And so there's like a minimum amount you have to earn to have access to this scheme. So ultimately the framing is, we're going to support you if you're a working parent, which is the need, right? I'm not going against the need. That's the need. But then when you start to think of the reality of it, you're then going to start to put your child into childcare more than you probably would have because it's free. You're going to work more than you probably would have, and you're going to spend less time with your child. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what I'm getting at, which I believe that subtly, maybe obviously, overtly, the clamor for us to make more money is probably where we're starting to erode.
What's going to happen is we're going to have an exacerbated case of mismatched incentives. So what you're describing is people will naturally be incentivized to use all 30 hours and only if they meet the requirements, they're going to push themselves to meet them. We're already not spending enough time with our kids. Right? What's the definition of spending time with someone, right? If I'm on a date with someone, we're both on our phone. Are we there? Are we in the digital world? So we're not with each other. And that happens around the family dinner table. The kid will have an iPad, right? Or whatever. So people are moved to those incentives, and that's the breakdown of community that you're describing. We went from communities to two-parent and child, if you have them, families, and that's it. Mm-hmm. So the community shrunk, and the time we're spending with those people are now even shrinking. And this leads to what I describe as hyper-individualism, right? Mm-hmm. We're not just individuals. We're living in a time of us seeing ourselves as so separate. Mm-hmm. What's your take on separateness?
Do you know what's fascinating about this? Like, geographically as well, when you look at how cities were made in some respect, they were like really small communities, villages put together and amalgamated. And looking at London, for example, there's almost like a desire from planners or what have you to go back to that village way where like everything is in your local area, so you don't need to leave. But I don't think that's from a place of trying to escape hyper-individualism. I think it's literally efficiency. Like, how can we make it so efficient that you can live, work, breathe, sleep, eat, go to the gym in the same area, so then you have more time to work. Yeah, right? I don't want to be like one of these like people who has this opinion that working is negative, and of course, like given what I do, I don't think it necessarily is. But that is a very important thing to underpin. And so it might seem like you constantly bump into your next door neighbor. You probably don't know their name. Like, You don't leave your door open.
Which 20 years ago would have been wild.
Right, yeah. You don't know their name. You can live next door to someone for years and years and years and not know their name, not go for dinner, not like that is the reality of where we live, regardless of the clamour back to community. And that comes from what you're saying around hyper-individualism, because we as people, we are time poor more than ever. And I think not for necessarily like 100% positive reason, but because there are so many other distractions. Like you said, like if I spend time on my phone when I'm next to you, right? I put down my phone at some point and I realize, oh shit, like there's 30 minutes gone immediately. So we are constantly thinking about how to get time back. And that's the reality of hyper-individualism, like we are very much, I think, consumed by ourselves because ourselves show up in multiple arenas. It shows up in the digital realm, it shows up in the physical realm. And so we have almost like two parts of us showing up at the same time. And we have to pay attention to both of them.
Do you think you're describing like ego or the ego body? Like us being obsessed with whatever is firing the dopamine in our brains for us, about us, keeping us in our little bubble of us?
Potentially. I think ego can be seen as a negative word, but it's also just the reality, right? I think everybody, do you know what? It's really fascinating. When you look at a child, or let me say a baby, they're naturally selfish. And like, they don't want to share. They don't want you to take the thing from them. They want things on their terms. Innately, they're selfish. And it's like, we as a society see that as the wrong way to be, and share your toys and share this and share that and be patient. But you have to look at how someone's born to see actually maybe we were meant to be selfish, like maybe we were meant to think for ourselves. And potentially over years of conditioning, actually that becomes the thing that's not the right way to live. So I think ego sits at the heart of everybody. Whether you inflate your ego or not is a choice that you then make. And I personally think for communities to thrive, you have to have an ego that's lower in the spectrum to allow you at the very least to give yourself time to understand someone. That's just my personal take on how people can get the best out of people in general, is an understanding. Everything should be rooted in how can I better give time to this person to understand innately who they are, why they make decisions. And from a, advertising or marketing perspective, which is the industry I'm in, how can I best serve them to suggest that I understand you, give you emotional connection, buy my product. That's kind of
I was writing about that recently, just on my Substack I published this morning actually, was about the shift to using the word purpose so often.
Yeah.
Remember like a few years ago, maybe about a decade ago it started, Simon Sinek really started this like shift towards like find your why, and then companies like Virgin, who I did some work with back in the day, was doing a bunch of change around this. It became for many people though, replace your mission statement with your purpose statement. And it was still transactional. It was still like just an assignment of purpose. This is what the purpose is, without the feeling behind it. And that was convenient for marketing companies because they could sometimes do what you just described. Hey, we've got this emotional connection because we're the good guys. Yeah. We're donating some money to this or whatever. Sometimes it worked and was true. Sometimes it led to scandals, right? And I wonder if these things are healthy. Like if what you're describing is all this comes down to money, and that creates, or the systems that were created for someone to make money lead to exacerbation of the feeling that the world is on fire, and that is screwing with all of our emotions. And that becomes a cycle because that leads us to more of the scrolling to escape from it all. The only way to break a cycle is from within, right? So what do we do about this cycle?
We're asking deep questions that I'm not trained to know.
We don't need to be trained to know it. You just need to be you.
Yeah, no. I think like you say, to break a cycle, you need you need revolution, really, right? You need people to go.
We are going deep today.
You need revolution. You need people to go against the status quo. But I think it's in no person, government, powerful individual's interest for that to happen.
No,
so it's not
of course
gonna happen, you know, right? Like over the course of history, you know, ruling leaders are the few, and it needs to be kept that way. So yeah, revolution is something that I just don't think is really possible in this realm, you know, and also because I think the way that you can often see people who speak against capitalism are always put in some like left weirdo box. Like, how can you not like money? You know, like, how can you not want money? How, like, you know, you need money to exist. But that's a very facetious, like, surface level way of looking at what capitalism is anyway. And I also must say, like, I don't think this is strictly and solely about, you know, like how much money can an individual make. But I think from a company perspective, business perspective, ruling elite perspective, government perspective, people who make the decisions perspective, it kind of is. So then it's consistently top down, constantly pressured, pushed down, and then we receive all of the messages that we receive. And the funny thing is, in terms of what you said about hyper individualism, the interesting thing is that I think that's a belief. You know, like a lot of people feel like they can make decisions on their own. They can be in control. I don't think we really are. Like when we're talking about algorithms and social media platforms, we are literally served certain things that other people are not. And so you can't say you're in control of what of the media you're engaging in. You can change it slightly by like dwelling a little bit longer on that video, like, and then dwelling a little bit. That is an active decision that most of us don't make. Like 90% of our decisions are made by our unconscious mind. You know, like, so 1 out of 10 times you can't control how much time you're going to spend on this video, and therefore you're going to keep getting served that video and similar videos. So you can't say you're in control of what you're engaging. It doesn't happen.
And one of the things I'm concerned about here is that, like, media is under threat, as traditional media is under threat. So the news is not news anymore, it's clickbait. And it's like that because it has to be to compete with social media. Yeah. So everything we're describing, I think, gets purposefully exacerbated by traditional media. And then you've got the algorithm, so new media, I guess we could roughly call that, or the platforms that facilitate new media. They just are that way. So now everyone's hopped on that bandwagon. If you had to summarize the state of media as an industry as a result, you now look at it from a marketing perspective, so maybe that will shift it too. How would you describe it? Like, let's be very clear. What is the state of media right now?
I think the state of media is that it doesn't know what it wants to be and what it needs to be. Media constantly flexes to the popular technological platforms rather than like being what it needs to be and then flexing outward. So, for example, you know, the whole TikTok being banned thing, right? Which I think was a play anyway. I don't think it's a real thing. I mean, like, Donald Trump's the hero now, right? which is the big irony. But I think what was fascinating about the fallout of that was people were talking about, you know, like jobs being at risk or professions being at risk and people losing their livelihoods. And I really do, you know, sympathize with people, you know, being in the media space. But I think it shows the underlying problem, which is we obsess about trends so much and don't think about the piece underneath it, which is actually just TikTok is a vehicle for content aggregation and dissemination, right? The same content can go anywhere. Back in the day, it was TV. Back in the day, further, it was newspapers. Now it's TikTok. Could be Instagram. Could be YouTube. The danger you face by like completely obsessing over how to smash a platform rather than like what is actually the content that's going to be gold, is that platform can go literally at any moment. And then all of a sudden you've lost your followership, you've lost your readership, you've lost whatever it is, right? And instead, the content principles are often being forgotten. So I think the state of media is that people are trying their hardest to repurpose the same thing in different ways for the platform, rather than thinking, actually, maybe the thing underneath is the problem. Maybe we need to rethink how it is that news, media, whatever is packaged, full stop, and then start to think about how we place it in different spaces and places for different people to engage in.
Who's going to do that if everyone's acting reactively? And what you're describing is a reactive business model. Everyone's reacting to whatever is making the most money right now, which is basically wherever attention goes, right? Where attention goes, energy flows, and what that means is online or in any space where money can transact, that's where money goes, right? Gary Vee's gotten really big saying this: attention, wherever attention is, money is. Attention's a resource. So everyone's going to wherever that is, which means that they're reacting. When you said that a minute ago, I was like, that is fascinating, because think about the way businesses have used to and still sometimes usually operate, or ideally operate. They go, here is what we're going to do and why and who we're going to do it for. And then we're going to figure out like what our marketing channels are or whatever, right? So you start from a proactive place, whereas it feels like the whole of everything that is media and marketing, because of the way media works, is all reactive. If everything is reactive, who is going to sit down and intentionally design new systems that were actually built to serve people?
Yeah, no, I get it. I think that it doesn't need to all be reactive, though.
Exactly. How do we shift?
That's where we're going wrong.
Yeah,
you know,
I completely agree.
Reactivity is a part of gaining attention, but with that reactivity comes a complete lack of understanding. You know, like this idea and concept, for example, that Gen Z have the attention span of a fish. I'm always just like...
The way you said that was the best way I've ever heard that said in my life.
But I'm just like, it fundamentally can't be true, because, you know, podcasting is huge at the moment, and we're talking like 2-hour long podcasts, or like binge-worthy Netflix shows. You can't talk to me about attention span being low when people can sit there for 6 hours and engage in media. Like, the problem is you, not the audience, right? And so I think that, again, going back to understanding, that's the only way out. If you can truly understand what makes people people and serve them in the most complete way possible, that's when you can start to be proactive. That's when you don't need a trend to be able to engage with audience. Because I think at the moment, there are so many examples, flash in the pan moments of brands jumping on trends successfully because they go viral. But what does that actually mean for the P&L, you know, in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 years? Like, because as soon as I take away TikTok, you know, your whole strategy gets thrown in the bin, because you're constantly thinking about reactivity and trends. You haven't served anyone in any other spaces. So that's what I think. It needs a real holistic step back, understand audience engagement principles, really like dissect culture in a completely intersectional way to then be able to be proactive. Otherwise, you are gonna constantly be reactive.
Yeah, a return to proactivity for the people, the companies, the personal brands that are using the platforms. In the ideal world, the platforms wouldn't exist to make us reactive. So I guess it sounds like the answer is stand above the crowd, right? Be like the meerkat who's like poked their head above, realize like, oh, this wasn't right, and I'm going to set a better standard myself. And this is like the Alex Hormozy thing of like, it's so easy to be the best now because everyone's doing mediocre shit. So if you can figure out how to do the virality thing while still being proactive, you've probably already set yourself ahead.
100%.
Really, really good insight. You mentioned a second ago, returning to what it really means to be a person. And you started alluding to this earlier. What do you think, in more depth, what does it mean to be a person, right? If we're being proactive, designing things for what is best for people, we must understand what it means to be a person so that we can do that.
I just live by the principle that I just believe that most people are way more similar than different. I think like we've grown up to believe that, like, you know, you have a different ethnicity or a different race or a different gender or a different religious belief system, or you're from somewhere else, or you have a different sexual orientation, that like those things make us so different. And I just don't believe that that's true. I think, broadly speaking, most people want to be loved. Most people want to be cared for and cared about. And I think most people want to be listened to, most importantly as well. And I think, broadly speaking, most people want to learn. Like, and learning can look very different to different people. And those principles of, I think, humanity are there in like literally 99% of the population. And the piece above it is, okay, yeah, but, you know, I was born into this world, so therefore I have to do this, or therefore I have to do that, or therefore I can't do this and I can't do that. And that's what drives, I think, the people to feel like there is a complete different way of showing up as a human. But if we go back to those principles, which I fundamentally believe, there are probably a few others, but I fundamentally believe that, broadly speaking, that underpins most of us, then that's what makes us all human, you know? Shared belief in wanting to be loved and cared for and listened to. I think it's that simple.
Philosophies and wisdom traditions and religions and spiritual practices all over the world have figured this out. I think the yogis really effectively boiled this down, that separation is the greatest illusion that there is, right? We are two physical bodies experiencing life from different perspectives. That doesn't separation, because we have separate physical bodies and separate experiences, exists only on the physical level. We are only physically, as far as we can perceive. And we know scientifically we've only got like 99% of light we can't see. We can only see like very limited amount. We are so deeply connected to all other beings and all other things that are, and it just appears as though we are separate, and we practically need to live as if I'm a different person from you. I've got a different identity, and that makes us unique in like ways that are nice to experience. But to take that to its logical extreme is to go, I'm completely separate from everyone. And that illusion leads us to being okay with murder and war and discrimination and just all the things that people are doing. You look at any other creature on planet Earth. They don't destroy their habitats, right? They don't lead other species to extinction. The cycle of life works so well. We seem to be the outliers.
Literally.
And I personally think it's for a few very simple reasons. One of them is just, or maybe fundamentally, is just because our brains allow us to see us as separate, and therefore put ourselves on a pedestal where we're allowed to do these things. And it's been human history, and I think we're evolving in a generally positive direction. I think the new way it's become expressed is what we've been describing today. That's what worries me, but also personally gives me some hope. Because if we can evolve out of like tribes that always war with each other into only really warring on Twitter, which I can choose to opt out of, right? I'm not on Twitter. I can choose to opt out of that. Then we've evolved, haven't we? Kind of.
I love that. Yeah, keep your wars to social media, and like in real life, let's just be normal and amicable.
Exactly. If, therefore, this is us understanding people sounds like a very important skill to have. How do we understand people better build this as a skill and understand why it's so important?
Yeah. There is a Korean principle called nunchi. There's a book called The Importance of Nunchi. And it's a principle and an idea that like Korea is one of the most influential countries in the world. And because of this principle, people are able to be influential. So the idea is, when you walk into a room, how do you have such a sense of self that you then don't need to play out yourself, and you can start to look at people in the room and understand who's the quiet one over there, and would it make sense for me to go and speak to them at this time, or who's the loudest one, and how do you navigate rooms, basically? How do you navigate rooms and the complete individualism that everybody has and the ways that they show up in the world, and in some respect use that to your advantage? Like, you'll know, like in business principles and selling principles, this idea that like the extrovert, you have to be an extrovert to be a good salesperson, is completely incorrect, because the best salespeople are the ones that ask the best questions and actually listen to the response, and therefore can flex what they're going to say after. And it's that similarity, right? Which is, I need to have as good self-awareness as possible to be able to show up in myself as the most influential way, way possible. And I think that idea is just not thought of, spoken about, taught in, I would like to say, the UK. I can only speak for the UK. I'm from England, like I've had my whole education system here, but I can kind of see other countries. I won't say like they're even worse, but like we exist to be unapologetically ourselves. And I think that idea, which is being heavily spoken about, I'd say over the last few years, is a dangerous one. Like, because for a number of reasons. Number one, how would you describe yourself? Like, I'm sure you show up completely differently in different scenarios with different people. Still doesn't make you a different person. Like, you would still come home and look in the mirror and probably say like, it's me, hi. Like, even though you've shown up in 3 different ways throughout the day. So what is your authentic self? And then the second problem is, maybe your authentic self limits someone else from being their authentic self. So where's the middle ground? And that's why I just think that ability to slow down, pause, think about how you're showing up to then allow people to feel empowered, is the most influential skill anybody can have.
So this has spoken to me very directly, because the way my brain works, I'm bouncing around between different things, and I can speak very quickly and work very quickly, and my brain, like, the cogs turn very fast and it gets messy and it gets noisy. I'm also very good at like slowing down, taking a deep breath, speaking more slowly. And I'm fascinated by how one can train themselves to walk into a room and not think about themselves. And I think that's what that is. That noisiness is when I'm caught up in a pattern, a habit that is instinctive and somewhat based in survival. I can still be positive, but is my brain, am I looking or am I seeing? Am I hearing or am I listening? Right? It's that difference.
Yeah. It's hard. Like, it's hard. We've had decades of not necessarily thinking in that way. But like you spoke about like 2 beings right now sitting opposite each other, like, I have a perception of you, you have a perception of me, I've got a perception of myself, you've got a perception of yourself. There are 4 immediate perceptions that we
Can I
have
add
to do.
2 more into the mix?
Add 2 more.
Who I think you think I am. Sorry, who I think you think I am, and vice versa.
Right, and that's all playing at
the exact same time.
At the exact same time.
Yes.
So it's impossible. It's very difficult. Let me not say it's impossible. It's very difficult, right? To know how to be, to show up so that you can feel comfortable. Why do you need to feel comfortable? Are you not comfortable with how I, that's literally the way that we're going to be thinking. So it is very difficult, but I think fundamentally, if we can all live in a way that like, you're everything and nothing, and everything needs to be learned, and you don't know everything. And I think this has always been my challenge with, funnily enough, I referenced the book, right? I don't read much at all. I don't listen to, like all of these podcasts with experts, because I think sometimes it can often come across like these people know everything. And they don't, because I think we should all be in a constant state of learning, which is the irony. Because then I'm not learning in that medium because of what I've just said. And so I think sometimes the best learning you can get is just by sitting down and listening to someone and not saying anything, not having the desire to respond. I think really interestingly, like when I'm speaking with you, like I'm watching you, and as a host, you probably have a list of things that you want to get into. And most hosts will hear what I've said, say, okay, and then go with their
Move
narrative.
to the next question.
Right?
Yeah.
So they're not listening.
Yes.
And they're not thinking, oh, that's a way to segue into something I think, and I'm going to share that. And you've got a really good skill at listening and then going there, and probably at some point later coming back to your train of thought. But not many people have that. And so, it means when you're watching a political debate, no one's answering a fucking question, because they're literally, they have a script in their mind. Yes. Someone said something, they'll then just go with their script.
Yeah. You know what I was hearing? One of the things that might have won Trump this election is that's what he did that Kamala couldn't do. He did about 40 hours worth of long form podcasting, going on to Rogan and other things and just waffling. And Kamala went on, and basically her team would give the host, these are the questions you're allowed to ask them, move on, then we're done.
Yeah.
And that's the shift we're seeing, is we had the shift from company brands to influencers, and now influencers is kind of shifting further and evolving into like personal brands. And that's how you have a personal brand, is you shift and flow, and you can't do that if you can't listen and see, as opposed to hearing. And
precisely. Looking. The TikTok CEO, his like monologue, right? That was all, it looked unscripted. Whether he delivered it unscripted, scripted, I don't know. But that's how humans show up. Like life is unscripted. Our life is literally unscripted. So as soon as you have someone in front of you talking from an obvious script, it loses all humanity.
It loses momentum and energy.
Yeah, completely. And relaying it back to brands, brands ultimately, I always say this, are an amalgamation of people. They're an amalgamation of humans, right? Whether that's from the directors and the founders or the people who work inside the organization, they are an amalgamation of humans. Why then do they find themselves behind almost this paywall of this barrier of being a brand and showing up as a brand and having brand values and brand tone of voice? Why does it have to be one? Why can't you have multiple? Because that's how humans are. We have an unscripted way of showing up. You as a brand should be able to flex that. You shouldn't be so stuck by this one or two principle way of showing up as a brand, because that's not how people engage with anything. So I always think the most successful brands are the ones that can speak honestly, speak without a script, speak like a human. That's how I think the best brands show up. So.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here really quickly with an offer for you. Those of you who are a little newer to my work, which is most of you looking at the show's stats, will probably not know that for much of my career, I've been working with people to take more ownership of their lives as a coach, mentor, guide, and educator. This show exists to help people discover and cultivate their greatest inner leader. And that stems from a personal mission of mine. But what is it actually mean? Well, I break this down into 3 things: calm, confidence, and courage. We could all do with a little bit more, at least a little bit more, of all 3 of those things in our lives. But how do we make it happen? Well, that depends on us, on our temperament and our context, and so much more. So I've developed a free tool to help us understand 3 of the biggest things that I've noticed hold us back from those really powerful states to be in: restlessness, reactivity, and resistance. What I help folks do is move from that place into that place of calm, courage, and confidence instead. So you can use the link below to check that out. It's totally free, super simple, quick, and easy to use so that you can get just a little bit of clarity in that regard. And I created it just for this show because I noticed how important it was to overcome exactly those challenges. That's what the show is trying to help you do after all, so why not make it easy for you? So with all that being said, I really appreciate you. Hope you find that useful, and let's get back into this episode. We were chatting a bit before we started recording, and you kind of expressed it a bit now. We both got this. So we live in London, we live in the UK. We both got this frustration with the UK right now. Really, what I'm actually going to ask you, it sounds like I'm segueing into politics, but I'm not. I promise. What is your story? And how has that led to the things that get you up in the morning now to go out and do what you do and do the work that you do?
Yeah, what's my story is you know what? It's mad that like the question that you asked that I should probably know the answer to, I don't know the answer to.
You know what's funny is a few people have said this to me now, because what I used to open with this question and I've stopped because I really want to get into the meat, and then that helps inform, or who you are helps inform the significance of everything we just talked about.
Yeah.
Something about changing the ordering seems to confuse people's brains a little bit because we've had to go outside of ourselves. Now I'm asking you to go within.
Yeah.
So I wonder if it's the ordering.
No, I think it's brilliant though.
Okay.
Like I think it's important because now I can play back on things I've said to think, you know, what's my story and why do I care about all of this shit that I've just spoken about? Because I think it's fascinating. I mean, my story, I guess, you know, I'm a child of 4. Like I've got 3 other siblings, British Nigerian. I was born in London. Feel very in tune with my heritage as an Igbo Nigerian, which like my parents did an amazing job at like raising me to remember like where I've come from, if that's the right terminology, from Delta State, Nigeria. And I think like I probably am a product of seeing my parents be completely self-sacrificial. Like I remember from such a young age, my mum always saying to me that her mum said, if she can't make a better life for her children, then she's failed. And that's what she's trying to do. And I'll always remember that constantly. She'd say it over and over and over again.
Was it your parents that immigrated, or
Yeah, my parents. Yeah.
They were.
So my mum was 19 when she came here. My dad was 30 or 28, 29, I can't remember. So he was in the Navy, so he used to come over to Britain quite frequently, and then decided to move. And they met in Nigeria, and was like, oh, to my mum, let's go over. My mum didn't want it. She'd never even left like the kind of like area really in some respect. And then just did it. She thought she wasn't going to go for that long, which is the irony. But yeah, they're both first generation, some second generation. When I guess to be frank, like, and I say again, why I say I think the order you've done is really interesting is because I think I grew up around community, you know, like because they had to, you know, like they've left somewhere that they know, moved to somewhere that they completely don't know. And even though back in the day, I think community was still roughly there versus how they grew up in Nigeria is completely different. And so, my dad's sister was here. My mum's sisters came over after a while. My mum's uncle was here already. So there was like a real tribe and community where they found themselves in West London. And so, yeah, I guess I'm like a product of that, really, which is everybody mucking in to help each other, very like close, tight-knit, but fundamentally self-sacrifice and opportunity. I think like they both exemplify how to search for opportunity. And like, really interestingly with the Nunchi principle, and I'm laughing again because I think why you've done it this way is incredible, because I think it helps, is again, like another story that I constantly remember my mum telling me is how like my uncle, her uncle as well, like made quite a big success of himself at a time where like home ownership for black people was completely a myth. And he did it because in his kind of like common area and living in a flat, every day he used to sweep the common parts, the outside. And his landlord at the time, like fortunately or unfortunately enough, was leaving, was moving back to, I think, Israel, where he's from, I think. And he was like, do you know what? I've had this property for years. I've never seen anybody like sacrifice their time to clean something that's got nothing to do with them. I'm looking to sell it. Like, do you have capital? And my uncle's like, no, of course I don't. He helped him to kind of like buy the property essentially.
Wow.
Over a course of time. And I always remember that story because again, like it goes back to this idea of like completely removing self-interest. I don't get anything from cleaning your balcony, but I might get something from it. Like the door is always open. And I think that opportunistic view and way of looking at life was very much drummed into me very early. And that's what made me start to buy Krispy Kreme donuts by the dozen and sell them individually, because I saw an opportunity. I saw my peers hungry at school. Like,
I've heard this story so much.
And the top shop was crap. So, there's my commute in through Victoria Station. Oh wow, there's an economies of scale here. They don't need to know there's an economies of scale. I can sell it individually. And that was my route into like entrepreneurship. Like I saw opportunity through that. And I was always entrepreneurial. Moved to uni. I started events, nights and promotions, typical stuff. It's not anything unique, but just done in a way that is a bit different or shows up a bit different. But alongside that, underneath that, I'm also a product of parents who kind of didn't want risk to be attached to their children. And this is a very commonplace story. It's why like a lot of first generation parents will try to push their children into medicine and should push them into accounting and all of these so-called safe environments. So, there I was studying science at uni, knowing that I didn't want to be a doctor, knowing that I had this burning like ambition of opportunity and all of this kind of stuff. And so that has kind of shaped and navigated how I've ended up here, which, was a labor of love of my parents, knowing that actually I need to kind of give them something. I don't want to just come out of uni and be an entrepreneur. Let me give them something. So I'll apply to grad schemes, ended up at L'Oreal, was there for 3 years, very safe environment, paid well. I'm like, look, mum and dad, like, here you go. That's the safe route. Even though I'm not doing your beloved science, this is the safe route. So yeah, I guess story is always hard because you're going up and down. And I guess like the one thing that I missed out is I was born with sickle cell. And I think I always remember age 8 or 9, like, I must say I was fortunate, and I am fortunate. It doesn't affect me so much in my day to day. Maybe like once every couple of years I'll have a stint in hospital seriously, but like, it can show up a lot worse. But when I was younger and still now, like you have frequent hospital visits to just make sure everything's all right and the consultants are looking at you and stuff. And I remember one time coming home and, finally having access to internet. So it means that I can Google everything and not look at an encyclopedia. And I remember Googling like the average life expectancy of someone with sickle cell. And I think at the time it was like 35.
Wow.
Or something like that.
Wow. How old were you at this time?
Like 9.
Okay.
And I remember thinking, fuck, that is not far away, you know?
Your parents are that old or whatever, yeah.
That is not far away.
Wow.
And so I think the fact that I remember it, and I don't necessarily have a great memory, great long-term memory. So the fact that I can remember that, I think very much shapes my urgency for things. Because I feel like I was constantly living against this idea that like, I don't have much time, right? And like we as people don't have much time. And so, you know, I think I've changed a little bit now, but like if I run down to a tube platform and I just miss a train, I used to be so angry for no reason. It's only until my wife was like, what? Why? Like, why are you actually like this? Like, you just missed a train. There's another one coming in 2 minutes. Like, what's going on? And I think it's that, like, you know, very much constantly battling against time, trying to find the most efficient way to do things so that I can maximize time. So when I was coming here, I know I need to go to the front of the train because the exit is near. I'll go to the front of the train.
Yeah.
You know, that's the kind of
the same
thing that I do, right? Because I think time is precious. So yeah, I think everything within that story is probably then landed to what I would say started Word on the Curb, because I wouldn't say we started it with any intention of being a business. We started it because we felt pretty pissed off that people's human truths weren't being understood well enough. And so we decided to be the Word on the Curb, buy a camera, teach ourselves how to use it in uni, and go across campus depicting people's human truths and asking them what makes them them, why they think this way about certain current affairs or topical news stories, because I didn't think media was doing a good enough job at depicting that for young people. And I think because I've always grown up in London and around all kinds of different cultures and religions and people in general, I've always wanted people to show up as themselves in whatever way that is and whatever way that looks like. And it pissed me off at uni that, like, let me not say at uni, it pisses me off in general in the world that doesn't happen. And I think a lot of it is due to not trying to listen, not trying to understand. And so we created a vehicle for that. And, you know, fast forward 10 or so years of doing that, it's now what it is now, which is a cultural insight and content creation agency.
Which is wild to think that purpose has stayed without for all that time. Yeah. And it's like, I think about Google, right? Google's mission statement when they started was to organize the world's information, which is still what they have. I'm thinking like Google Cloud doesn't do that. Like Google, I don't know, Google Search doesn't even do that. The AI, is that doing that? But as a result, it's so big, they can keep going. And you set out something really big that was so meaningful, you could keep going with it. Has anything changed in that time? Like, as a result of all these things, right, and you changed as a person, and this impatience thing is interesting because, like, I have something of that too, so I get it. Like, I miss a train, I'm like, 8 minutes? Oh. Because then what if that leads me to missing my next train? And your brain just starts going. And I think it's indicative of the kind of person who, I think we can be motivated. No, let me take a step back because I started one train of thought. Let me move that to the side for a second and go into this first. We are motivated usually by one of two things. What we can gain or losing something we already have.
Right.
And have you heard this before? Do you know which one of those two things do you think is more powerful?
Hard to answer that question. I think, yeah.
Go. I want to see your thought process.
That's a really hard question. I think innately, immediately, I'd probably go with what we can gain. Because I think what you can gain can prevent what you can lose.
So that's really interesting. I think that answer is indicative of someone with an internal locus of control to some extent, right? You know, if you can gain something, you can use that gain to put yourself in a better situation so that you don't lose things. human beings are more reactive than that for now, unfortunately. Statistically, some studies were done that shows that we're much more motivated by losing something we already have. So if I said to you, let's run a 5K race, and if you lose, or if you win, I'll give you £100. If you lose, I'm going to take £100 from you. You're much more motivated to win that race, right? So we're so much more motivated by what we might lose which is why people, I think, are afraid of change, because I know what I have now.
Yeah.
So it's less risky than the alternative. If something changes and I lose, right? Risk of starting a business, leaving L'Oreal and doing this weird thing called Word in the Curve where we taught ourselves stuff with cameras. It's like, that's what risk is, and that's why risk is scary. Obviously, there's practical things with risk, right? You've got a child, you can only risk so much, etc. But the reason why risk can be so paralyzing because we don't want to lose things. So
interesting.
When I think about this, I'm thinking about you have this kind of internal locus of control. You set this purpose, and using that, you were motivated towards something, which means you overcame the hurdle of risk and judgment and all these things. And I guess I'm trying to figure out why. Like, it's easy for me to say clearly it was purposeful, right? What did that purposefulness, whether it was because you were pissed off about a thing or because you were motivated by not wanting to waste time, what was the cocktail of things that pushed you over the ramp that many people lose momentum trying to go up?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. The gain and loss thing's fascinating because I get it, but I mean, I think 5K is probably the wrong thing because I wouldn't do it either way.
You get what I mean?
But like, funnily enough, like I reckon I would, if it's like the home straight and I'm thinking, I feel like I would go harder thinking about getting 100 quid, which is weird.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you break the mold.
Yeah.
I want to figure out why.
But you know what? I think it's the risk. I think it's the risk-taking element. Like, for me, I've always had quite a... I always get this which way is wrong. Like, I'm a risk-taker. Like, and I think the reason I'm a risk-taker is because I'm always like, what is the worst that can happen? Leaving L'Oreal was a risk, supposedly. But in my head, I was like, there's no way this is a risk. If it doesn't work, I can go back. Like, I basically, and I think it's intentionality, right? I took a sabbatical. So I didn't say I'm leaving. I took a sabbatical. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have a job when I come back, if I want to come back, if it doesn't work out. And I remember my line manager at the time, she, an amazing person, Annika, she was like, also, not only that, but you know you're going to learn so much in that year that you take out that when you come back to the business, you can apply the knowledge like tenfold and they'll see it as a position of strength. That's the reality, you know. Like, I don't... One of the things that we are fortunate about at this moment in time, fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, is gaps in your CV. They don't really mean anything. When I remember being younger, my mum always used to say, like, never have a gap in your CV because they'll start asking questions. Might still happen, but as far as I'm aware, and if I was to receive a job application and I saw a gap in the CV, I'll just ask the question, like, what were you doing? If they tell me they were traveling the world, I don't see that as a negative, right? Like,
it begs the question, what did you learn?
Yeah, exactly, right, yeah, that you can apply. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's an area of conversation,
yes,
right? Rather than like, I did this for 2 years, and then I went there for 3 years, then I went there for... If anything, that's making me ask more questions that are thinking a bit negatively because I'm like, are you just hopping? Like, what's making you go from there to there to there to there to there to there? Like, what time have you had to like learn? What time have you had for yourself? Like that? Anyway, that's a separate conversation. But to me, I always felt like, yeah, cool. Maybe I'm not going to pay myself much at all, if anything. You know, in this first year, maybe it might not work out. but how do I know if I don't try? You know, and what is actually going to be the worst case scenario? And I think that this goes back to something that I always say to young entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs is like, take your time. Like, I get it. It's easy to rush into something, but the best piece of advice I've received is like, learn how to lose someone else's money. Like,
yes.
right? Before
If you do
then,
it on someone else's dime, failing on someone else's dime,
fail on
so
someone
much more
else's
powerful.
time. Fail on someone else's time. Learn on someone else's time. Make relationships on someone else's time. Create networks on someone else's time. That's ultimately like all of the things that you need to start any form of business. All of those things. Know-how, relationships, you know, those two things are fundamentally vital. And you can do that without you being the person to pay for that time. And so however many years you want to do that, and yes, the longer you leave it, the harder it is to take the risk. Like you said, like, you know, if I left the business, if I left L'Oreal when I had a kid, maybe I wouldn't. Who knows? I don't know. I didn't have a kid at the time. So the more dependables you have, the harder it is to obviously take a risk. When there is none, what is the worst that can happen? You know, that if you look at it with that attitude and look at it actually like, I'm probably going to gain from this risk, because you'll learn so much. When you get into an interview and let's say you without taking the risk versus you taking the risk, and you've got an interview and someone asks you one of those questions like, give me a time where you've learned how to deal with money, right? If you say like, oh, by the way, like I started my own organization, went bust. That's what I've learned X, Y, and Z. If I could do it again, I'd change this. Versus, oh, when I was in an organization I was at 2 years ago, they gave me a P&L to manage, and what's more interesting? So I think it's just about the gain of the risk that you need to see.
You know what I think you've built up is a really powerful frame, a really powerful lens and directionality through which you view, maybe stemming from this whole thing of how do people really work, where you view the results we get from how we work, where you've been able to see things aren't as linear as they're made out to be, because you can logically think backwards. You can reverse engineer. If I'm here and I know all these things, if I've done all these things, logically, I can have known all these things because of this experience. If I failed a business, like in the States, failing a business is like a rite of passage, basically, right?
Yeah.
Here, working with a bunch of startups for a while, I saw everyone terrified of risk. You, despite identifying as British, right? You're born and raised in Britain. You don't have this British culture limiting frame. Some people, I need to work with them and talk to them about like deframing and reframing into a more constructive view. You just seem to you just have it. Do you think that comes from that story? Do you think, or that life that you've had, where like, do you think you developed a constructive frame to see people, to see beyond the physicality of the person in front of you, right? The don't judge a book by its cover thing. And through that, it feels like you must have some of that, because through that you've been able to logically understand where people are coming from, give them that credit, and use that to illuminate who they really are. Does that make sense? It feels like that's what you've done. That's such a powerful ability or combination of skills and perspectives.
Oh, thank you, man. This is like therapy, bro. Do you know what? It's funny looking retrospective. Maybe, yeah, I think you're right. Like, again, I remember a story at primary school, and again, maybe I often say I'm a product of my mum, but she, you know, I had a character that was like quite loud at school, you know, like sort of attention, kind of like to make people laugh.
I mean, you're one of 4 at home,
yeah,
so probably not surprising.
You're
the youngest. Oh,
yeah. You know? So like, I think that was always there, and because of that, you know, innately, you can be seen as like the popular kid at school or whatever, which I don't know if I would say that I was, but I was always able to navigate loads of different groups. Never had like a best friend. Like I'd navigate groups because why can't I flex to be in that group? Why can't I flex to be in this group? Yes, I can, like grime music, but I can also like Coldplay. Do you know what I mean? Like, why not? Right? And I remember one story my mom always tells me, I don't remember this, but she said that in primary school, there was someone who was like kind of being bullied or like a little bit ostracized. And like for a couple of weeks, I made sure that I just spent time with him, like consistently, and become his friend and like all of this kind of stuff. And I guess it's because I, like innately, yeah, like when you are, yeah, maybe when you're constantly going to hospital because something's wrong with you, and whilst it's under control, it's almost like, weirdly, like I remember sometimes like nurses would come in, it's almost like I was a lab rat. They were like, oh my God, he's got sickle cell, but look, he looks so healthy. Like it was quite bizarre. So it was always like, oh, but what if that changes? Like, I don't know. So like, I can't spend time like just living in my own bubble. Like, let me just explore. Let me just see like what's going on. And so maybe there's a part of that. I think also, in terms of like logically thinking about steps or logically like looking outside of, my mind, that temporary reality is definitely there. Like I definitely think that everything is temporary. So, like make of it as you can, like right now. There was one other thing I was going to say and I can't remember it.
This idea that everything is temporary, you got hit with that at a very young age, right? And this is very selfish now, but I'm thinking like maybe that's why I've been one of the two big reasons why I think I've been so impatient in my life up until very recently. But to be honest, I'm still quite impatient. Is because when you understand that everything's temporary and there's something you really want to do, you're like emotionally energized to do it. You're like, it has to get done now, which isn't always a bad thing, right? Listening to someone like a Cody Sanchez talking about speed of execution. Some of the most successful people are the people where if someone pitches them an idea and they trust that person, they're like, it's not like, let's set a meeting next week. It's like, call me now. We'll talk about it for 5 minutes. Pitch it to me now. It's like speed, some level of urgency is a good thing. And it's interesting to me to understand where you get that, because I'm seeing it play out in reflecting on your journey in such positive ways. I want us to understand a little bit briefly as we start to wrap up how you would support someone or advise someone or recommend someone or encourage someone to adopt that perspective that you've described, right? Because it is, I do think it's particularly around the part of I'm more motivated by what I will gain, which helps you overcome that risk, which helps you step more into who you really are instead of being afraid and sinking into your limiting self. That's a really powerful place to be. So what's your perspective on how someone can move into that?
What you just explained, you're right, it's completely anti-British. Like that scenario I can imagine happening in New York or anywhere else in America, but not the UK, man. Flipping now. Do you know what? I think, where did I get it from? That's the point that I wanted to make as well. I think my parents gave me, like I said, a really great sense of self. And, one of the things that they used to tell me about was, in Nigeria, there was a civil war, the Biafra War, and like where I'm from, like the Igbo South, it was, like a very persecuted region. They wanted to kind of like split from Nigeria. That area, which was going to be called Biafra, had a lot of the oil resources. It's like very oil rich.
Oh, okay.
And the government...
That's never caused problems before.
There's a book called How Britain Made Nigeria, I think is called.
Okay.
The government is placed up north, so their whole kind of control goes up there and up north. And Nigeria ultimately is an amalgamation of like hundreds of countries, really and truly, hundreds of tribes, hundreds of people of heritage, thousands if not. And so naturally what you have most of the country not wanting to separate from this oil-rich part of the country, and the oil-rich part of the country thinking that, well, we want to separate. and a lot of other things, but we don't have time. And so standardly, your UKs, your Americas, the big countries, they back Nigeria because they don't want that to happen. And only a few countries back Biafra, and thousands of people die, and because they don't want this split to happen. And I'm from that area, and funnily enough, like my dad, rest in peace, he had a scar in his shoulder, right? Because he was on a train leaving school because during the war to go back home, and they ambushed the train, and he got shot here, right? And one of his aunts saved their life by essentially piling dead bodies on top of them so that people left. And what happened after the Biafra War is, whilst the government kind of gave some level of repatriation to people who survived, it was peanuts. Biafran's Igbo people are very entrepreneurial by spirit because of what happened there. They had to literally rebuild everything, rebuild their homes, livelihoods, everything. And so a lot of the time when you see, I mean, not say a lot of the time, because that's getting into percentages and proportions, but Igbo people are very entrepreneurial by design, and I think very opportunistic by design. And so that whole piece was literally drummed into me very young. This is your history, this is your knowledge, know it. Because even to this day in Nigeria, some of my cousins aren't taught about the Biafra War because it's not in their interest to teach people about it. And so where that piece comes from, that urgency comes from, is definitely from my mum and my dad. My mum especially, she's the kind of person who, the Pomodoro method.
Yes.
Yeah, she won't do it.
Okay.
Because it doesn't make sense to the way that she works.
Yeah.
Because she could be doing something and then she'll be like, crap, I forgot to do this. And I'm going to do it now because if I don't, I'm going to forget.
I'm like that.
And it's funny because that was me before, but then I started to think, actually, is it wildly inefficient? So over Christmas, I remember trying to teach her this principle.
Right, okay.
And she was just not having it. She was like, stupid, this doesn't make sense. Doesn't make any sense. Yeah, we want to watch a film, but I literally need to take a picture right now and send it to your auntie. And I was like, but she's probably not awake, so you could do it tomorrow. And she's like, but why would I do it tomorrow? I'll forget. So it's two conflicting principles, but that's how she is. And I think that's probably where the urgency piece, as well as other things that I've shared, has probably come from, to tangibly help people to think in that way. I think purpose is an interesting word because it's been almost hijacked by companies who don't actually mean purpose. But I think purpose, going back to one of the only other books that I've read called Ikigai, which is all about raison d'etre. It's from Japanese philosophy, reason for being, how you show up, and what you're good at, what the world needs, what you can get paid for. And I always forget the fourth, but the intersect is your reason for being, your Ikigai. If you can understand that, that will be your constant guiding principle. No matter how many iterations we've gone through with Word on the Curb, where we now see ourselves as an agency, the purpose behind it is all about audience and understanding and engagement, as it was when we picked up a camera at uni. It was always about understanding people, engaging with them in whatever way possible. The way we do that is cultural insights, leading better to create better creative strategies that are more efficient and can land with the target audience because we understand them. We understand how culture shows up. But the purpose and the underneath was always about, let's just understand people and give them a voice because they're often misrepresented. And so when I say purpose, I don't mean it the wacky way. I just mean, what is your intention behind doing X, Y, or Z, or being A, B, and C? And understand that and allow that to guide the decisions that you make consistently. No matter what your iteration is, go back to it. Because what you will find is 10 years down the line, no matter what pivots you've made, the central part should probably still be there. It should always run through. Otherwise, you've got a completely different business, and then it's not a pivot, it's a complete change. And that will then also help you guide your appetite to risk. I think taking yourself outside of yourself will eliminate the idea that it is risky in the first place. You know, when companies talk about business risk, they're thinking about it from a very internal lens. And like you said, what they can lose, they're thinking very short term. They're thinking, crap, will I be fired by making this decision that goes wrong? And they're not thinking about the long-term gain, which I think is also a bit of a problem. Like short-termism, I don't think guides risk-taking very well, because there will always be like, it can go wrong tomorrow, but what if it goes right in 2 days' time? And that zooming out is another principle that I live by. Like zoom out as much as you can and think about the long term.
It's so important. This is so powerful. You cannot have directionality until you have intentionality.
So that's a bar. Yeah,
You've got to start with that.
Yeah.
Look, man, there's so much more we can go into that we don't have the time for today. Yeah. Maybe a future one. This has been really cool. To bring this home, I've got a closing question I ask everyone who comes on the show. Mm-hmm. The show is called Lost in Searching. And Ndu, I'd love to know, what is the biggest question in your life that you are still searching for the answer to? This can be about anything. It doesn't have to be about anything we've talked about today.
Will Arsenal win the league?
Oh, no.
Anytime soon. Flipping hell. It's been
Probably not.
Too long, guys.
Probably not.
You need to bring that home.
Got the answer to that. Probably not.
What is the question that I'm still searching the answer for? Okay. I think it is like how can individuals genuinely make enough sizable impact to change the world? Like I think we can have a ripple effect. We can impact people every day. But I often get quite frustrated when I think about how much of a mountain we as the like little people down here have to climb to influence the people who have the influence. And I'm constantly questioning myself all the time about what the point is. I'm someone who leads with a lot of purpose and desire to change things, but I actually sometimes question whether it's a better use of my time to just impact the people around me.
Yeah, what's your answer so far? What are you leaning towards? Because talking about the individualism piece, and like I'm wondering if we can impact it as individuals. And if the answer was no, is that a bad thing? I don't know, but where have you landed so far?
Yeah, I
briefly.
Mean, it's hard. Like it's almost like it's like smashing your head against a brick wall. You know, like you don't want to fall foul to being the individual, because I think that is a problem. Individualism, I think, is a problem, and not having collective thinking. But then you can drive yourself mad when you think collectively and other people aren't, and then you see the fruits of your labor not necessarily working because people are very used to doing things in one way, they don't want to change, or it's not in people's interest to change, or people might think differently. So where I am with that, I think I probably sitting on the fence. I show up a lot more for my family, because, you know, I think having a kid has really reframed my purpose for living, like my reason for being. I think like everything really is like, how can I just give him the best start? And how can I be there and show up because I love it, right? And so that might have pushed me back towards individualism a little bit over the last few years, to be honest. Okay. But yeah, I'm still searching for what the right balance is. Yeah.
It's all an evolving journey of discovery. Yeah. So there might not be one right answer, or it will take a while to unfold, and that's okay. Yeah. Look, man, I appreciate you so much for being here with me today. This has been a great chat. really enjoy it. Really have enjoyed it, and really, just appreciate you for sharing so much so openly with all of us. So appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, man.
Alrighty, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I hope you found it valuable. We've reached a number of really important milestones on this show already. It's only been a couple of months, but I'm so grateful to those of you who not only subscribe, but also who listen this far along, who leave the comments on posts, or who give me really powerful, beautiful messages in response. It's been a humbling journey, and there is so much more to come. If there's something about this episode and the question that we answered, or any of the learnings that you took away that you want to make sure someone else you know understands themselves, then please do share this episode with them, along with your reflections, teaching other people something that you learned, passing the information on, or even just writing it down for yourself. All help you retain the answers to this, and any inspiration it gave you even more. That's the purpose of all this, is to give you as much positive, powerful, impactful results as possible on your journey to developing your own inner leader from so many different dimensions, not just the one we've talked about today. So thank you so much for being here, sending lots of love, and here's to your success.